Join me in prayer. God, as we share in this message this morning, open our hearts, our minds, our spirits. Speak to us once again. Renew us, inspire us. Send us back into the world, new people. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Okay, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to ask 4 people in this row to stand up. Oh, Denny, you have to pay attention. 4 people. 4 in this row, 4 in this row, 4 in this row. Let's see, 4 in this row, 4 in this row. I know you're all looking at me like I'm crazy. 4 in this row. Come on, if you're able, stand up. 4 in this row, 4 in this row, 4 in this row, if you're able. 4 in this row, 4 in this row, 4 in this row. Let's see, how many rows do we have? This is important. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, we need a couple more here. 4 in this row. Don't look so excited. 4 in this row. 8, 9. 4 in this row. All 4 of you. Let's see. We need a couple more for good measure. You get to stand up and you get to stand up. Okay, I want you to look around. That's a lot of people standing, isn't it? Trisha, for good measure, you stand too. See, 80 out of 100 people. The assumption is we have about 100. I didn't do exact math. Please don't hold me accountable. 80 out of 100 people at some point as we make our way through life will struggle with mental health. I want you to look around. Because, see, we have this habit of saying it's about them. It's about the younger generation. It's about we other. But this is our story. And so today we're going to be talking about what Jesus might say about mental health. Thank you. I woke you up. You were so helpful. I appreciate it. I want to start this morning as we begin to talk about mental health. This is something that I feel passionately about. It's something that I have experienced through my life. It's something that I have experienced through our family's life and our story. It's something that is part of who we are. It's the fabric of the human experience. And I want to tell you, if this is your story, you are not alone. This is part of the human family story. Remember last week when we were talking about generations, and I shared that for the first time in history, 6 generations are living at one time, which is one of the reasons we have such a diverse opinion of how a lens through which we see the world, so many different experiences and way of life. But there have been some recent studies about the millennial and Gen Z generations. And the studies talk about that they have unique stressors that are not necessarily experienced by the older generations. And they did a study from 2011 to 2020, and they reported that episodes of depression and anxiety went from 8% to 20% in this particular generation. And that's about a 60% increase. The same is true in the statistics with suicide and suicide ideation since they began the studies in 2009. These same numbers of contemplating or considering suicide or completing suicide have increased more than 50%. And so I'm here this morning to say we in the faith community, we need to take mental health seriously. Why the changes? One, the first, and I want to say, to me, this is one of the greatest gifts that the millennial and that the Gen Z generations are giving to those of us in the older generations. I know I have to claim being in an older generation now. A quick side note, I was at my high school reunion, my 35th high school reunion, and somebody came in and I didn't recognize them. And when I told my childhood friend, I said, I didn't recognize that person. They look so old. And she had to remind me that I do too. I forget sometimes, but the younger generations, these are my kids' generations in particular, they are more willing and more open to talk about mental health than any other previous generations in the past. In the past, previous generations have considered talking about mental health a sign of weakness, a sign of you're not able to pull yourself up by those bootstraps, those metaphorical bootstraps that they talk about. And these younger generations are teaching us that we are healthier and better for it when we destigmatize and we normalize talking about mental health, and rather than stuffing it and ignoring what's happening in our lives. This really is a gift to our generations. The freedom to say, life is not perfect. Right now, I'm struggling. So I do want to just pause and thank the younger generations for helping us destigmatize mental health. It's so interesting to me how easily and normatively we talk about our physical health. I was thinking when I was on one of my trips, I started having this really severe tooth pain, and I realized that I had broken one of my teeth, and I simply got on the phone, I called the dentist, I went into town, into the closest little town we had, and they simply repaired the tooth. It was that simple. Why can't we talk about mental health and mental illness in such a simple way? See, our brains, think about our brains. Our brains are the most powerful organ in our body. Our brains are these supercomputers. I read a statistic that 1,000 MacBook Pros don't have the same storage capacity as our brain. I have no idea if that's true. Please don't hold me accountable. It's a metaphor. It's an idea. But it takes in all these inputs and processes and then determines what we will do with them. It makes our heart beat. It makes our blood pressure rise. It affects how we see the world. It's the storage unit, if you will, for our memories. And then it tries to put these memories together and help us to know if we should be afraid or unafraid. And it offers protection and all of these things. And sometimes our brains get a glitch. When my tooth had a glitch, I called the doctor. And sometimes it's helpful when our brains get a glitch to call a doctor, a therapist, to get help. Sometimes it's useful to use medication to help with this glitch. Anyone here have high cholesterol? Are you on medication, some of you? Yeah. Same is true with our brains. There was a great quote, or a little, Deanna shared with me this little thing about cortisone. I don't know, is Allison there? Oh, you can't make your own serotonin. Store-bought is fine if you can't make your own serotonin. This is Suicide Prevention Month. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. This gives us an opportunity to pause and reflect and be aware of our own mental health. There is a movement right now in the younger generations to get a semicolon tattoo. This tattoo was inspired by a young woman, a college student, by the loss of her father to suicide in her own long-standing battle with depression. And this symbol is a symbol of hope and perseverance. A semicolon tattoo represents hope and resilience for those who have faced mental health challenges. It signifies a pause in life's sentence. A pause in life's sentence, not an end. The movement behind this tattoo fosters solidarity and reduces stigma around mental health and suicide. There's also a movement, if you've heard in suicide prevention, to say and use this particular quote, "It's okay not to be okay." It's okay not to be okay is about kindness, compassion, empathy, and understanding. It acknowledges that life can be difficult and reassures people that you are not alone in your struggles and you are not any less valuable or worthy because of your struggles. There are 6 sort of practices, if you will. I just want to share with you these practices that Psychology Today lists as they talk about how we might help with mental health. The first is, and this is so important, especially in a world where social media has so much influence and we find ourselves more and more isolated. The first is meaningful in-person relationships. This is different than social media friends, if you will. And I know, or if you're texting, when I'm struggling, if I send a text and I get maybe a sad emoji back or something, that's helpful. But it doesn't take place of sitting face to face with someone that I love and giving me a hug and sitting and listening to me. Meaningful in-person relationships. These people become our stretcher bearers. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but Paul says that we are to bear one another's burdens. And so I want to ask you, do you have people, community in your life where you have meaningful relationships? This one is so important. It's something that I think we often forget about until you don't have it. Sleep, right? We need to sleep. I learned this week when we sleep, the brain is washing itself of its toxins. It's getting rid of stuff that shouldn't be there. So it is so critical in order to have our mental health and wellness to have sleep. Exercise and diet are important. They're an important part of helping our body stay in sort of balance, if you will. Seeing a therapist or a life coach or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor is really helpful and important. To be able to have someone sitting and listening and helping you shape and form and reframe how it is that you make your way through life. It also helps us to retrain our neural pathways. Have you ever seen if a dog runs along the side of a fence and it sort of becomes, you can see that a path is there? Sometimes negative thinking, sometimes that's our neural pathways, and we have to retrain. We can retrain our brains. And it helps sometimes. It's so critical, I believe, to find someone, a trained professional, to help you do that. Medication is so helpful. Oh, that's where I was supposed to put up the serotonin slide. Sorry, Allison. I was thinking ahead. She's quick on her feet back there. I was thinking of my son, Will, who is diagnosed with substance abuse disorder and anxiety, and he went to his annual appointment ready to, and I've gotten permission to share this story, to get his prescription renewed. And he had a new doctor because our doctor of a lot of years is retiring. Oh, it's so heartbreaking. And the new doctor said to him, well, in really a judgmental way, do you want to be on these drugs the rest of your life? My son at 22 looked at her and he said, absolutely. I'm on these drugs and I'm healthy and alive because of them. And it is true, at 22, with substance abuse disorder and anxiety, those drugs have been a miracle, as has therapy and psychiatrists and psychologists. And so medication is so important. And luckily in our family, we don't do shame. And so he can come home and he can say to me, can you believe what this doctor said? Instead of stuffing it and feeling even more shame about his own mental health and his own disorder. And then faith. Faith is a worldview when life falls to pieces. It helps shape. It helps us understand how we respond. Is there any hope? It gives us some hope in the world when things feel hopeless and helpless. It answers the question, is the worst thing really the last thing? There's a psychologist in Psychology Today who talked about religiosity, if you will, and its religious beliefs and practices and faith. And he says higher levels of religious beliefs and practices is associated with better mental health. In particular, the research suggests that higher levels of faith are associated with lower levels of depression, anxiety, substance abuse disorder, and suicidal behavior. Faith is associated with better physical health and subjective well-being. It's not the only answer. There was a great video this week of a pastor saying, if you hear that faith, if you only have faith, you're not going to experience any of the other things, that's a flat-out lie. That is not true. And yet faith is an important component alongside these other components to help us live a life of mental health and wellness. So what would Jesus say about mental health? All of these things that we have talked about, that we think about with mental health and disorders, they existed in Jesus' day too. They just weren't named. There were people who experienced war and violence, and they too experienced PTSD. There were people who had deep depression and anxiety. People struggled with thoughts of self-harm. Think about two of the leading figures in faith, Moses and Elijah. They both prayed to God to die. Think about the story of Job. One bad thing after another. It was hard to even imagine how he was coping with life. And if you remember, at one time, a friend came and sat beside him, and their presence alone was what he needed to get through. Think about the Psalms, which is the heart and soul of the Bible, and it reflects the experiences of human beings that they have had across their course of life. The Psalms have mountaintop experiences of people who are just giving such great thanks to God for His majesty and all His glory and everything that happens. And there are psalmists who find themselves in the pit, and they're saying things like, "Where are you, O God?" Even Jesus from the cross uses Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why have you forgotten me?" A sign of lament. Or in Psalm 42, where it says, "My tears have been my food day and night, while I continue to say, where are you, O God?" That is the human experience. This shows us in the midst of this experience that even though people were struggling in the depths of despair, they were white-knuckling it and holding on to this faith and somehow refused to let go of God in the midst of their pain. When we look at Jesus' life, we see him spending most of his time with people who are hurting and broken. Remember the Pharisees, they were judging Jesus, and why is he spending all those time with people who are hurting? And he says, it's not the well who need a doctor, it's those who are sick. He walked alongside those feeling hopeless and helpless and offered them life. In his healing, he would say to people who were struggling, "Your faith has made you well." And if you remember that paralytic man, he was held on either side by his stretcher bearers, the people who come alongside of you and carry you when you cannot walk yourself. Think of Mary Magdalene. Some of those demons that Jesus released from her by reminding her how deeply she mattered and was loved. I believe, in a sense, Mary Magdalene in that moment was free of her shame, her pain, her struggles, emotionally and physically. He offered healing and hope. A famous psychologist of the 20th century said this, and I will say that it's a bit overgeneralized, but he said, "It is unlove that makes us unwell, and it is love that can make us well again." Combined with therapy, sometimes medication, and love can carry us and strengthen us and heal us in the midst of our pain. So what would Jesus say if you were struggling with PTSD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia? He would say, you matter to me, to God. You are deeply beloved. So come along, follow me. I can't help but think of those who have been diagnosed with mental illness and have changed our world. I think of Beethoven, who was famously had bipolar disorder, may not have had medication to help him make sense of his mental health disorder. Or Abraham Lincoln, I found out this week, struggled with clinical depression, and oftentimes people wonder if that was part of his empathy and compassion and strength and resolve to end slavery. Or Winston Churchill was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he talked about the effect that it had on his life. Martin Luther King Jr. struggled with clinical depression his entire life. More recently, there's been a focus on those in our who are part of the sports world. Michael Phelps really became outspoken for mental health. He won 28 medals, 23 of which were gold. It's incredible. Phelps has been outspoken about his depression, and he said, as he talked about a variety of illnesses that he struggled with in his life, he said, "Depression is the most painful illness I've ever dealt with. Out of everything I've been diagnosed with, depression hurt the most." He went on to say, "I can tell you I've probably had at least half a dozen depression spells that I've gone through." And he talked about the one in 2014 where he didn't want to be alive. And so he sought help through meditation, education, and therapy. He says he thrives today. Naomi Osaka revealed her issues with depression and anxiety when she withdrew from the French Open in 2021. She has been very open and forthcoming in talking about her extended breaks from the game to protect her own mental health. And then, of course, how could you not be captivated with the story of Simone Biles this past summer? 11 medals she's won, 7 gold, 2 silver, 2 bronze. And one of the best parts of the Summer Olympics was how much emphasis was put on mental health. She said, at the end of the day, we're human too, as she had so much negative media towards her. She said, I have learned that we have to protect our mind and body rather than just go out there and do what the world wants us to do. She has said things like, I don't have to be fine. It's okay not to be okay. But I really think by accepting this, that it solidified me being brave, speaking up for myself, for my mental health, and putting myself first. That, she said, is bravery. One of the best stories of the Bible is the one that you heard read just a few minutes ago. As Jesus sends his disciples out into the waters in the dark, and the storm come up and the waves, and they're drenching the boat, and they're terrified. And Jesus comes along, and he sees them out there in the midst of this storm, and he's walking along their water, and they see Jesus coming, and they're even more terrified because they think demons are coming up from the underwater, and the demons are going to drag them down to the underwater, and so they're even worse. And he says to them in the midst of the storm, "Don't be afraid." See, this isn't a story teaching us about boating. It's a story teaching us about life. It's a story teaching us and reminding us that when we are in the midst of storms in our lives, Jesus comes to you and comes to me. And what does he do? Even when the winds are still crazy in the midst of the storm, as Simon Peter comes to him, he keeps his eyes fixed on Jesus. And Jesus reminds him, "I am with you." And somehow, Simon Peter was able to stay above the water. I don't know what boat you're in. I don't know what storm is brewing. But I do know our faith tells us that Jesus joins us in the midst of it. What would Jesus say about mental health? How does he work in the world today? How does he address poverty and other concerns he has? He uses you and me. So what might he say to us about mental health? He would say, you need God, and you need each other. In sleep, in diet, and medication, and a therapist, and faith. And remember, you, my friends, you are beloved, he'd say. You matter, and you are never alone. Amen.